Thank you for having me here. This is exciting, unexpected. I'd love to know who canceled and how I got the slot, but maybe Banksy or somebody. I want to thank Maker City LA. I want to thank Creative Mornings. I want to thank Sharon from Culture Brain. If you guys don't know her, you should. She's awesome. She's kind of like my Mr. Miyagi. She's been telling me which ideas of mine are bad and good. And so this is a new thing for me. I've never spoken before about like my career. I've been thinking about it for the past couple of days. I've been in the business a long time because I started when I was 17, and it's everyday machine gun fire. So it's hard for me to step out of it and think about what my philosophy is or what makes me tick. But I'm going to tell you some of my stories today, and hopefully some messages will come out of it. So, to know, well, first off, so I'm a producer. I do films like Jiro Dreams of Sushi. I do Broadway shows like Rock of Ages. I do other docs. I'm going to show you a trailer to another doc I did tonight called Surfwise. I'm trying to get into the digital space, trying to learn about it. I'm in the TV business, so I'm a little schizophrenic. But my philosophy is really, I'm just, super passionate. I wasn't like a smart kid growing up. My big joke is that I got 790 on my SATs combined, and you're probably also young. You don't know what SATs are, but it's funny. I'm 46, and I love the business more than ever. And the highs for me carry me through the lows of the business. And there's nothing like a new idea, and that kind of wipes out all the other the bullshit and struggle that I go through in my business, you may go through in yours. So when I looked at the theme of rebel, I was like, I don't look at myself as a rebel. I mean, I'm definitely eccentric and off the beaten path. And then something struck me, and I was like, all right, I know how I can relate to that message. And I want to tell you a little bit about who I am and how I grew up, because I was raised by a really rebellious guy, my father, Gordon Weaver. So I'm going to show you a slide that might shock you. Guess which one's my dad? It's not the guy in the Speedo. But so I'll just tell you this really quickly, because there is an hour-long version that my therapist and I discuss. But I was raised in New York City in the 1970s. Well, first off, I grew up in New Jersey, and in a little town called Millstone, and it's the mid-1970s. Pretty normal middle-class life, although my dad worked at Paramount Pictures. So he would, he'd get on the train every day and go to New York and work at Paramount. So we were a little different in that sense. But other than that, we were a pretty normal family. My sister, my mom, my dad. It was 1976. I was 8 or 9. Parents get divorced. I remember like really horrible fights and just bad 70s ice storm stuff. And, then all of a sudden my dad moved to New York City. And a couple of weeks later, I was about to start 4th grade, and I was in my room playing with my friends, and all of a sudden there's a limousine in the driveway. My dad showed up, and I had seen him since he'd gone to New York, and an hour later, I was in this limousine with my father with all my bags packed, and I was moving to Manhattan. And on that ride into Manhattan, he told me about this, how he was divorced and he still loves me and he loves my mother and life is great and he got this new apartment and all this new stuff and he got me into this school in Harlem. I don't even know what that was. And then he tells me that, he's gay. And I didn't really understand that, other than when I probably would tease kids in school and use the word fag. And I just didn't understand what it was. But he explained it to me on the car ride. And I just remember like looking out over, I think I was like by the Meadowlands, if you guys know New Jersey, and just like staring blankly. And it was, if I look back on it, it was probably a really positive, nurturing talk about what gay is and this and that. And it's like, okay. And then he tells me, but we don't have time to go into New York City today, because we're going to a place called Fire Island. And which I thought was like Knott's Berry Farm. I literally thought it was an amusement park. And so it's so cliche, but my dad was the judge of the Miss Fire Island contest, the drag show. So I woke up in New Jersey and playing with my Topps baseball cards and doing whatever I was doing, and I went to bed in Fire Island with my dad in this whole new world and lots of men in short shorts. And my dad didn't dress in drag. He just every Halloween he would be Marlena Dietrich. So probably like your dad. Uh, that was, my dad was an amazing marketing guy. He ran marketing at Paramount Pictures, and so he came up with that pose, and he was an amazing guy. But back to the gay thing, that was his philosophy. He was like I'm not gonna be ashamed of who I am anymore, and I'm not gonna hide anything from my son, and it's me and my son, and we're gonna do it together, and I'm gonna be out. And for most of the part, it was a good thing. There were probably some things he shouldn't expose me to, but he didn't. He was just, as he said, dancing as fast as he could. And so when I was getting ready for this, I was like, wow, I look back on that. I was like, that's really what shaped me, because I had a dad so the first thing he did when I moved into New York, I had my own subscription to Playboy that arrived at my house with my name on it. And I was 9. And but he didn't want me to be ashamed of the human body. And he wanted me to date black girls. And he sent me to an all-Jewish summer camp. And yeah, I went to an all-Jewish summer camp, which I loved, and I have a lot of relationships actually from that camp that I still work with and that are my best friends. So, but we had a really loving, amazing friendship. We still do. He's still around, and so I guess that's what shaped me. And so I try to. I'm very curious. So where I'm not book smart, I'm curious. My dad gave me New York City as a playground in the '70s, just to go out and explore. And I remember walking home I used to go to school in Harlem, on 114th in Amsterdam, and I loved to walk home down Amsterdam Avenue, and when it was in the bodegas, it was kind of dangerous. So I don't know, I guess my dad was a rebel, and that's what shaped me, and I have an awesome company now called Media Weaver, and Mike and Tracy and Nick are here, and so I try to sort of bestow on them some of the things that my dad taught me. So that's my story, and okay, so this is a great thing. I don't know why I put this in here, but this was my Manny. This was the guy that would pick me up at school every day. So pretty embarrassing in 1978 when Carrot shows up in short shorts and a real attitude, and his thing, he was an actor, so he was an extra in Hair and Warriors, and he didn't want to be a nanny, and he hated me, and he was always pissed off, and somehow I found his headshot, and so yeah. It's I love my dad, but come on, this guy picking you up at school is just embarrassing, totally embarrassing. And I never told people my dad was gay growing up, because I loved my dad, and we had boyfriends, and I loved his boyfriends, but it was embarrassing. There was one thing to have parents divorced, a totally another thing to have a single dad raised you, but have an openly gay dad. And I loved it. If somebody asked, were you ashamed? I was I was never. My dad's boyfriend used to love to do photo shoots with me. So this was we'd have to go do photo shoots during the day. Very gay. But never ashamed of my dad, but it was embarrassing, when he'd show up at my soccer game in a mink coat with a tambourine. So, but that was my dad's boyfriend for a long time. So anyway, that's what shaped me, I think. And so I just thought it was important to tell some gay dad stories. So in 1985, we moved from New York City. Well, that was just a Sunday brunch at the house. Yeah, okay, enough gay dad. So in 1985, my dad became head of marketing at Disney, and I was 17, about to go into my senior year in high school. And that's when I got my first job, the summer before my senior year, working at Disney on the lot. So I think that was me then, and that's kind of when my career started. And I worked there during my senior year in high school. I was a gopher for Jeffrey Katzenberg, and even though my dad was president of Paramount, I literally was at the bottom of the barrel. But I loved it. I was making $300 a week and living at my dad's house and Xeroxing everything and listening to everything and absorbing everything. And Katzenberg had a famous quote then, if you don't come in on Sunday, don't come in on Monday. And so I loved it. And I wound up staying at Disney for probably for 7 or 8 years, working in the physical production department. I was known as I had a famous thing because I was the gum PA. So I would have to go into these meetings with Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg, and I had everyone's gum, and I would unwrap. I was like, great, because I'd unwrap the gum, and they didn't have to deal with it. And so I knew who liked Bubblicious, who liked Juicy Fruit, and it was cool because I worked in physical production, and that wasn't intentional. And I'm a creative producer now, but I like that my first 7 years in the business were like dealing with budgets and schedules and line producers and DPs and stuff like that. So now as I'm making movies, I actually have an understanding of physical production. And so I tried college for like 1 year, and it wasn't for me. And so I just kept working at Disney, and my dad and I thought that was a good decision. I had gotten all the partying done in New York City in the 80s, so it's like I didn't need to go to school and be in a fraternity. I love to work. So worked at Disney for probably 7 years until I was 25. So this is when I worked for Katzenberg, and I was like answering his phone. I mean, I think I was a terrible assistant, but I was enthusiastic and passionate. And literally, like these were the phone lines. This line was Weaver Communications. So that's when I started my own business, and I was a producer and a manager, I think, and hustling. And it was during this time that I found my first time I found my wife. So we've been together 24 years, minus 1 9-month breakup, and it's a funny story. It's not sad, but that's when I started like looking at projects and optioning things. And I was 22 years old. I was reading Life magazine, and I read about the Paskowitz family. And I was like, what the fuck, what is this? And it was the story, I don't know if any of you guys know who they are, but I read about this doctor from Stanford who dropped out of society in 1960. He was probably 40 years old because he had a nervous breakdown, and he loved to surf. He had been surfing with like Duke Kawanamoko from Hawaii. And so he was this doctor, surfer, kind of great Santini guy. And basically he had 9 kids, 8 boys and a girl. They bought a camper. Well, he bought a camper first with his wife, and they traveled around the world raising their kids, surfing, encouraging them not to go to school, to surf. They were Jewish, and I just fell in love with the story. And I remember Hillary and I were like, we were just talking about, we were living on like La Brea and Franklin, this little apartment. We probably had $400 in the bank, and I was like, I got to take the whole family out to dinner. And we were literally like, okay. I remember like calling her going like, how much is in the bank? Because I'm going to spend it all. And I drove down to San Clemente, and I took the family out to dinner. And I didn't lie. I didn't say I was anything other than I was, but I was a young guy working at Disney. And you'll see in a minute from the trailer what the father, like Dorian Paskowitz. And at this point, they were getting tons of press, and they had lots of offers. I remember Brian Grazer was after him, and this guy Brandon Tartikoff, and I was giving him my pitch, and the father turned them all down and gave me the rights for $1. And you'll see when you see the trailer why. I mean, the guy is amazing. And I failed for. I tried to sell it for like 10 years as like a stupid surf camp show, and I didn't know what I was doing. But this is the project that I really learned to pitch on. So I was doing it on my lunch hour. Hillary bought my first suit to go pitch, and I'll tell you about my first pitch after the trailer. But I guess I'm just bringing this up is because I optioned it. I didn't know what I was doing, and I just jumped into it. And it's funny because I thought it was a movie or a TV show. It wound up being a documentary, and it's an amazing doc. I think as good as Jiro. So if you haven't seen it, you should. So this is the trailer for the movie that I got made, 15 years after I first read that article. So this is Surfwise.
In 1956, after years of insomnia, after years of anxiety, I embarked upon an odyssey.
Dorian Paskowitz is a 58-year-old doctor who one day decided to give it all up and spend the rest of his life traveling with his family in a tiny camper from one wave to another.
He wanted us to be unchained to a mortgage, a moment's notice, just get in and go.
We'd wake up one morning and would be in Pensacola. Wake up another morning, would be in Corpus Christi, San Francisco, Baja,
Florida,
Venezuela,
New Mexico,
Alabama, El Paso. We just spur of the moment, go wherever.
Open the camper door, go out, do your thing, lunch is at noon. We were not attached to the physical world at all.
In some little town in Louisiana, we pulled over into the state park, and he says, guys, There it is. We're down to our last dime. And he was excited.
For 10 years, I was either pregnant or breastfeeding without one day off.
When you have 9 children living in a 24-foot camper, you have these flare-ups.
Eat healthy, live clean, surf clean.
Dorian had us in such a tight diet.
We couldn't have refined sugar, we couldn't have white bread.
He fed us branches for breakfast.
I wasn't some kind of radical.
He used to play Chairman Mao's wake-up song to the nation every single morning.
They go to a school I consider enormously demanding. I demand that they serve and be good at it.
We would confront him on a daily basis. I want to go to high school. We did everything the hard way. If it was easy, then something was wrong.
They're lazy.
He's a dictator. He was Fidel.
I swore I'd never surf again, ever.
Your parents said, you can go to school because it's safe, but don't go swimming with sharks because it's dangerous. Our parents said, you can go swimming with sharks, but you're not going to school because that is dangerous.
Nobody would ever believe the experiences my brothers and I had together. I wouldn't change that for anything in the world.
The good outweighed the bad. It was almost like a dream.
Everyone's trying to get that spiritual moment of perfection. We had it, we lived it.
I intend to put my kids through what my dad put me through. I'm going to keep the dream alive.
Wisdom you get from experience, and that is what my children had a lot of.
So cool movie. If you guys haven't seen it. Great director, this guy Doug Prey, who did like Scratch and Hype. I don't know if you saw those movies, but very cool. So I'll tell you one story about that so you can see Dorian. So I was 23. I was scheduling pitches on my lunch hour, and I was driving a VW Bug, and we bought my first suit, and I got this meeting with Amblin, Spielberg's company, pitching to Frank Marshall and Kathleen Kennedy. And so I walk in. I remember walking in, and one of the Pasquits had to rip the tag off my suit. I still had the price tag on it. I was so nervous. And I had Dorian and a couple of the kids, and I start pitching, and my voice is cracking, and I'm like pitching it as 8 is enough. And Dorian stands up in the meeting, and he goes, "Matt, shut the hell up. You sound like a horse's ass." And he looks at Frank Marshall, and he's like, "Frank, this is a movie about fucking. And if you don't want to make a movie about people fucking, we're getting the hell out of here right now." And he and started to gather the kids. "Let's go." He called his wife Mother. "Mother, let's go. We're leaving." And it was a disaster. So that was my first pitch ever. But yeah, so I learned to pitch on this thing, and I never really knew what I was doing, but I was just super passionate, and I probably made 10 grand on the movie over 15 years, and I don't care, and I would do it again. And so that began my producing career. So I left Disney probably when I was 25, and I partnered up with a kid named Tony Lord. We started selling things. I sold, that 9-month period I told you about when my wife and I broke up. Well, she started dating another guy, and this is when we were in our 20s, and stalking's a loose word. I went after my wife. I didn't like her dating another guy. And so there were a lot of funny stories that all made me look like a huge asshole. And but I got my wife back, and we're married, and we have kids, and it's all good. And anyway, one day I was telling the story to some writers, and someone in the room was like, they should write that. And I was like, write it. It's like a crazy story. And so they came up with this idea called Stalker, a Love Story. And they wrote it on spec, and wound up selling for $1.75 million, the script with Owen Wilson playing me. So, I mean, it hasn't gotten made yet, so that's Hollywood, and it's still brewing around. But just another example of sort of where my ideas come from. I think we have another one up there. So anyway, so this is in the time where I'm in my 20s and early 30s, and I'm pitching projects, selling them to the studios. I had an idea before Rock of Ages for a musical. I just love the 80s music, and this was more The Cure and Depeche Mode and the Go-Go's, less Whitesnake and Poison, which is what Rock of Ages is. And usually, traditionally, when you go pitch at a studio, you go in with a writer, and he's got a sheet like this, and you're pitching a story, and you hope they buy it. We decided, because of the nature of the music, that we would create a musical pitch. So I had this young writer named Brian Yorkie, who actually later on went to write a thing called Next to Normal, which won all the Tonys and a Pulitzer Prize. And And he and I cooked up this pitch, and we hired singers and dancers, and we hired a van, and we drove around to all the studios, and we went into conference rooms. And part of the pitch was like a normal pitch where the writer would pitch, but then he'd stop, and people would sing, Ola More, or We Got the Beat, and it was an awesome pitch. And we spent about 25 grand on it. When the executives got back to their office, this was a long time ago when iPods were new, they had an iPod waiting on their desk with the music from the pitch on it. And so that sold for a lot of money. Again, 8 years later, not made yet, but it's actually percolating again at Lionsgate. So, I had a deal at TriStar, Sony. I was selling a lot. I didn't know really how to get a movie made then. I knew how to sell, and that was just something that I guess you learn over time with, with maturity. And because I could sell anything, but I didn't know how to get anything made. So I finally made my first movie when I was 30, and I've made about 22, probably 22 since then. I don't know what so these are some of the movies, some good, some bad. Sympathy for Delicious was Mark Ruffalo's directorial debut. I met Mark through my wife, who produces theater with him. Very cool movie. I was a co-producer on We're the Millers. Hesher I love. I don't know if anybody's seen Hesher, but that was a cool movie with Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Natalie Portman. And so I guess I'll talk about Jiro. So a couple of years ago, and just another example of how I get projects, I was making Hesher, and this little nerdy kid who was doing my, is he going to see this? Is this broadcast? He's not nerdy. He's cool. So a guy that was a really handsome dude who was filming my behind the scenes for me came up to me and he's like, hey, I saw Surfwise, and I have a documentary kind of in the same vein. And he started talking about Sushi and Jiro, and I was really more into this kid. And that's sort of another thing about my career. I mean, the worst movie I've ever made was Rock of Ages, and for various reasons, but that was the one movie I did with like the big fancy director. Like all the great things that I've done has been like just believing in young people and investing in them and letting them go. So when this great, super talented guy named Dave Gelb came up to me, I was like, all right, it sounds good. Let's just make it for not a lot of money and just try to break even. And back to my wife, everything is about my wife and the bank account. So I went back and he's like, I got to go to Japan right now because I'm going to be able to film the fish market. And no one gets to do that. And I learned later because of this movie, The Cove, you couldn't shoot there, but he got in. And so we spent about 20 grand on our Amex, and we sent Dave, to Japan. I don't know if this was maybe 3 years ago, to start shooting Jiro. And it's just so funny because this came out the same year as Rock of Ages. And the Rock of Ages movie is perfectly fine, and it's helped keep the Broadway show going. But it's so funny that the $350,000 movie versus the $75 million movie with Tom Cruise works. And, so I don't know what that message is. You just never know what's gonna work. But Jiro's been an incredible experience. And I had nothing to do with the creative other than that I believed in this young guy and found some other guys, my friend Kevin Iwashina, and we went out and we raised the money and we just let him go. And it's crazy. We got to go to Jiro's a couple of years ago in Japan. So if you guys haven't been there, you won't get in. So you'll never taste it, but it's great. And not a barrel of laughs, but like amazing sushi. And so I think we have a little clip of Jiro here if you guys haven't seen it. So yeah, I mean, if you guys, I don't know how many people make docs, but they're always labors of love. And I have a couple I'm making right now. We just started production on a documentary about Steve Aoki. And I'm not into EDM. I listen to Springsteen all day, but it's actually a really cool story about Steve and his father, who was Benihana. And so I guess I'm just talking about docs and that they're labors of love. The fact that this thing made money was awesome and a miracle. And so again, if you guys haven't seen it, you should check it out. And it's this kid David Gelb, who directed it, is just a real genius. So the last thing, I know I'm running out of time. The last thing I wanted to talk about is Rock of Ages, which has sort of been like a crazy life-defining project for me and my wife who produces it and everybody involved. And we, about probably 7 or 8 years ago, I'm in LA and I'm doing all this kind of stuff and selling some movies and making a movie here and there. And my wife's producing theater on Santa Monica Boulevard, like really awesome shows at like the Hudson Theater, doing a lot of stuff with Mark Ruffalo. And I'm the douchey guy in there on my first BlackBerry and, not paying attention to the plays. I just didn't have an attention span for that kind of stuff. And then my wife produced the Pussycat Dolls on the Sunset Strip. And I was like, oh, this is cool. This is theater. And I just started just brainstorming about stuff. And I just had one of these moments where I was like, oh, wow, I'd love to make a Broadway musical for dudes. Like, let's make a show that like guys will go to. And it's funny that I didn't really go to Broadway growing up, despite having a big flaming dad. But now I love Broadway. And so I was like, let's make a Broadway musical for guys. And so I had a list of music that I wanted to do that I thought they seemed like show tunes to me, Sister Christian and Don't Stop Believin' and Wanted Dead or Alive. And so I had a list of songs. I knew I wanted it to end with Don't Stop Believin' because that just felt like a big, 11 o'clock number. And I knew I wanted it to be a party, like part Broadway show and part party. And that's all I had. And I brought it to this director who did the Pussycat Dolls with my wife, Kristen Hange. And she goes, oh, this is great. I just worked at the Roxy for a whole month. Let's set it in a club on the Sunset Strip. Great. And then she went off and found a writer. And it's something that I guess hopefully that will happen again to me. But we've just met a brilliant young guy. He was probably 30 years old. He literally was just a PA on the movie Mr. Wrong with Ellen DeGeneres, but he was like the perfect guy for us. He was like a great writer who was funny, who loved Broadway, who loved rock and roll, and he came up with this pitch for Rock of Ages. And if you guys have seen it, everything you've seen, he pretty much pitched us in that room. This was probably 2005, the summer of 2005. I thought it was a Vegas show. I was like, I didn't really know anything about Broadway. I'm like, this is a Vegas show. Maybe we can get into the Luxor if we're lucky. And so we started putting up workshops. And at first we did it at a bar on Hollywood Boulevard called King King. So we rented out King King. We did 45 minutes of the show. Chris, the writer, acted in it. He played this character, Lonnie, who's the narrator, who Russell Brand played in the movie. And he only created Lonnie because he didn't have the whole book written. So he goes, Matt, I have this narrator character that's going to come out. And when we don't have a scene, he'll explain what happens. And that's how I think one of the best characters in the movie evolved. So we did it there, and then we raised the money to put it up at, then we did it in a nightclub called the Vanguard on Hollywood Boulevard. And it was a show. I mean, there was a stage with actors and choreography and a story, but people were in cocktail booths and high tops and drinking and lighters, and then we would get kicked out of the club every night. Because the guy who ran it was like, didn't give a shit about this. This is when we were called the Hudson Hawk of musicals. So this was before the New York Times said we were any good. Like if you saw the show, you loved it. But if you didn't see it, it just sounded like a big hot mess. Like a jukebox musical with Whitesnake and Poison from people from LA. It didn't sound great. But if you went, you loved it. I mean, there was still a magic about it early on. So he kept threatening to turn off the electricity every night, and we're like, all right, we got to get out of here. So we went and rented a sound stage. So we rented a sound stage in Hollywood, and I don't know that anybody ever saw it back then, but this was like 2006, and it was awesome. And we had this thing with MySpace, and people were coming and loving it, and I was like literally, waiting for Gufferman every night with the seat, waiting for the Vegas guys, keeping it open, and so that ended, and then we finally did get 1 week in Vegas. CAA called, and we were like, all right, we got you 1 week at the Flamingo. And so we all got together and we went to Vegas and performed for a week. This was May of 2007, and it was a disaster. It was like the lowest point. It's funny, it was like a huge mistake that I made. But thank God, I don't know, maybe thank God it didn't happen, because if we had gotten picked up, we never would have gone to Broadway. So it was a disaster. It was the wrong hotel. You'll see, I mean, I was out in front of like Margaritaville every day trying to lure people in, and the show wasn't quite ready, and it was not good. And so after that, as Chris Dorenzo says, it was over. We were like, all right, well, we did that. Let's move on to the next thing. And I was just obsessed with the idea, and I loved it. And not like I wasn't obsessed with me being I was just obsessed with the idea. I loved it so much. So I partnered up with a guy named Scott Prizan and my wife Hillary and Janet and a bunch of people, and we went to New York to learn the theater business. And we raised $2 million to open off Broadway in about October of 2008. And I didn't look as, the whole thing about Rock of Ages was just passion and naivete. I didn't look at $2 million as a lot. I thought that was like a Sundance movie. But $2 million off Broadway is huge. I mean, because off Broadway is really hard to recoup. So we opened off Broadway. and I would like get everybody together for these like pep talks, and I would say, you know, don't worry about the New York Times, don't worry about the Tony Awards, we're going to be a bridge and tunnel show. You know, I was from New Jersey, half of the producers from Long Island, and we said that affectionately. That's how we're going to make this show go. We're never going to get any love from the theater community. And so we opened off Broadway, and people are loving it, but we're losing money every week because even though you're like even though you're 9th Avenue and 50th Street, you might as well be in another state. It's just so far from Times Square. So we're comping everybody. And then the awesome thing happened in November, we sold the movie rights. So we had a bidding war for the movie rights. And I think all this, we have one quote from somebody who was like, oh, it's Mamma Mia for dudes. But that's what the studios were thinking, that it was that type of thing. So even though we were losing money off Broadway, we sold the movie rights. So we're like, you know, we started to get a kick in our step, and we were really confident. But January was approaching, and like January on Broadway you're dead. It's like if you don't have a great show, you're done, because there are no tourists in Times Square. So January was approaching, and we thought, man, we're going to get killed. So we got to roll the dice one more time. So we closed on December 31st of 2008. And we go, all right, let's go to Broadway. And so we had about 4 months to raise $5 million. And Scott and I had this thing where we like, all right, we'll fly anywhere in the country if we think we can get $100,000 from somebody. And that's what we did, because the Broadway community, you know, there's a whole community of people that invest in Broadway shows, and they're awesome, and I'm in business with them now. But back then they wouldn't invest in this. We were too unproven. So we had to go all around the country and get sort of off the beaten investors. And we raised the money, and we opened in April of 2009. And so in about 8 weeks, we have our 5-year anniversary. We're now the 31st longest running show in Broadway history, and which is amazing. And it's like, I'm always on the Wikipedia thing, and like we're passing like Stephen Sondheim, and I'm always just apologetic because it's White Snake and Poison. But it's more than that. It's really a brilliant show, and beautifully architected by Chris and Kristen and our choreographer Kelly Devine. And so it's been for Hillary and I, who produced it. It's been a life-changing experience. Right now we're in Vegas, we're in New York, we're on Norwegian Cruise Lines, we're on tour, and we've played all over the world. And so it's been fun. But I guess what happened in that spring, you know, I'd still give that pep talk, and then all of a sudden, the New York Times review came out. And if you're at all curious, check it out. It's like this crazy review that we could have never asked for, and it was a love letter to Rock of Ages. And so the cool thing about that was then that gave like the theater elite permission to come see it. We weren't like a dirty little secret anymore. So then we had this awesome thing in the theater where we had the theater elite with the people who don't go to Broadway, who love this music. And so we had this awesome energy, which we also serve liquor in the theater. That may be a part of the energy. But we were the first Broadway show to serve liquor in the aisle. So girls with shots and beer, and but we gave them a script, or like, you can't go down, you know, you can sell it in certain times. But that's a small but cool part of the show, and that you could have a couple of drinks, and the show is still good sober. But it's fun. It's fun when you're in the Broadway theater, and some of you guys are going to go check it out in Vegas. So it's been an awesome experience. And you know, John was like, mention struggle, and it's like, this was a struggle, and I made a million mistakes on the show. I'm not afraid to talk about them. Vegas was a huge mistake, but if we hadn't done Vegas, I don't think we'd have been to New York. And I fixed almost all the mistakes with our other producers. And so we got the review. Then a couple days later, we got the Tony nominations, and we're at Radio City Music Hall, and you know, we're up against Billy Elliot and all these things, and we knew we weren't going to win Best Musical. They were basically like, you're nominated, but that was enough for us, that we were in the club. And so I think we have a little bit there was a documentary made about the show, and then I think it leads into our Radio City thing, which was sort of like the pinnacle of it all. So I think that's what we'll end with. So
we went to every Broadway producer to raise money for this thing, and they all gave us the Heisman. See you later.
The thing that defined this journey was that it felt like it was over at every turn. Like, it was just like, okay, well, that's the last time we'll ever do that show.
Yeah, we told them it was a perilous enterprise, that it was a bad time to move. This office had just closed Gypsy with Patti LuPone, and Hairspray, which had run 7 years, and Young Frankenstein.
14 shows closed. No one was going to the theater. The economy fell apart. Lehman Brothers, which, doesn't exist anymore.
We just had never done it before.
We were novice producers without a lot of credits.
Everyone's hired. Your general manager, your casting director obviously did their job. Your cast is sitting there. They're all reading the script for the first time out loud.
The original creators of the show were told that put the script in the drawer and forget about it.
It was the kind of experience where I remember looking at Matt going, holy shit, how are we going to pay for this?
Well, I pulled the script out of the drawer and I thought it was fantastic.
Anytime someone would say, well, if we go to Broadway, or if this, and Janet and I would stop them immediately. It's when we go to the Tonys.
Matt just looks at me and he's like, it's a love letter. And like the room erupts and everyone starts going crazy.
All right, everybody, Rock of Ages is a hit musical. It's a big hit, Rock of Ages.
We're celebrating the new Broadway hit, Rock of Ages.
Rock of Ages features some of the greatest music of the 80s, not to mention a lot of big hair.
I'm not talking one or two. I'm talking 15 to 25 people who've seen the show over 50 to 60 times.
The presidents of every single movie studio flew to New York to our little 500-seat theater to see our show. Alan Horn calls Matt Weaver at his kid's birthday party, ups the offer by 25%, and we went with New Line Warner Brothers.
It is a relatable, uplifting story, and it's set to what we think is going to be the greatest soundtrack ever in any movie.
If you don't get a Tony nomination, you are done.
I was trying to keep calm, and when the nominations came out, we were all kind of like mellow and everything, and lo and behold, we get 5 nominations.
The whole Tony's experience was amazing.
It was a dream come true.
We were against so many odds. It was so exciting to just be risking it all.
I mean, we've bankrupted our families over this. For real.
It's changed the lives of all those involved. It's changed the life of the creators, of the cast.
Everybody just got together and did it. I mean, in LA, we folded chairs. In Las Vegas Boulevard, every day before the show, I was out on Las Vegas Boulevard handing out, flyers. We all just did everything.
I don't think I'm particularly special. I think everybody that comes out to Los Angeles, come out with some kind of dream that you're going to take over the town until you're beaten down systematically over and over until you have no dream at all. And that's when I wrote Rock of Ages.